He was born for comfort. At least, that's what his father believed. Robinson Crusoe grew up in a modest but stable household in York. Not rich, not poor. The kind of life his father called the happiest state, the middle condition of humanity. Safe from desperation, safe from ambition. Stay in the middle, his father would say, pacing slowly. The extremes ruin men. The poor suffer, the rich grow proud, but the middle, that is peace. Robinson listened and felt nothing but suffocation. "I want to go to sea," he said one evening. The room fell silent. His mother pleaded. His father grew pale. "The sea destroys the disobedient," his father warned. "You are not born for storms." But storms were already inside him. He left anyway, without blessing, without permission. The first voyage was not heroic. It was humiliating. The moment the ship left the river and touched open water, the wind rose. By nightfall, the waves towered over the deck. Sailors shouted. Wood groaned. Robinson clung to the railing, green with terror. "I'll go home," he swore to himself. "If I survive this, I'll never sail again." Morning came. The sea calmed, and with calm came pride. The fear faded. The vow faded with it. He did not return home. The second voyage proved worse. Near the coast of Africa, their ship was attacked by pirates, swift, merciless, armed. Gunfire, smoke, screams. Robinson fought, but he was young and unseasoned. The pirates overwhelmed the crew. He was taken alive, not as a guest, as property. He became a slave in Salé. Days blurred into labor, cleaning boats, carrying water, obeying orders, watching the horizon from the shore and wondering how quickly freedom disappears. But he did not lose hope. He watched, learned routines, waited. One morning, his master sent him fishing with a Moorish servant boy named Xury. The sea was calm. Robinson's mind was not. "We have the chance," he whispered. Xury's eyes widened. "They kill us if we fail. They own us if we stay." He overpowered the other servant aboard, pushed him into the water, and set sail, southward into uncertainty. For days they drifted along the African coast, sun burning, water rationed, every shadow on shore a possible enemy. At night lions roared from the land. Robinson shot one for meat, the gunshot echoing through the wilderness. He was no longer a boy seeking adventure. He was a fugitive surviving by instinct. Eventually, salvation came in the shape of a Portuguese ship. They took him aboard, treated him fairly, carried him to Brazil. Brazil changed everything. He invested what little he had, bought land, began a plantation. For the first time he felt success, stability, wealth growing. But prosperity did not silence ambition. He joined an expedition to acquire enslaved labor from Africa. It was greed disguised as opportunity. The ship left Brazil with promise. It would not return whole. A violent storm rose in the Caribbean, not the brief terror of his first voyage, but relentless chaos. The sky blackened, waves crushed the hull, the ship cracked under pressure. "Abandon ship!" someone shouted. They launched a small boat. A wall of water flipped it instantly. Robinson remembered only drowning, salt in his lungs, the sky vanishing. Then sand. He woke face down on a strange shore. The sea rolled behind him calmly, as if nothing had happened. He staggered upright. No ship, no crew, no voices. He called out. Silence answered. He climbed a hill to search for smoke, for sails. Nothing but endless ocean and dense forest. "I am alone," he said aloud. And in that moment, the full weight of consequence settled on him. Not fate, choice. The broken ship still lingered offshore, grounded on a sandbar, a miracle. He swam to it, salvaged food, tools, guns, powder, nails, wood. Each journey through the surf a gamble with death. He built a crude raft, ferried supplies to shore, worked until exhaustion blurred his sight. At night he climbed a tree to sleep, fearing wild beasts.
Morning brought no rescue. He built a tent against a rocky hill, dug a cave behind it for storage, raised a fence of stakes around his dwelling. It was not comfort, it was defense. Days became weeks. He began marking time on a wooden post, carving each day into memory so he would not lose himself. Rain ruined powder, heat spoiled food. Illness struck him suddenly with fever and hallucinations. For days he lay in delirium, certain he would die unseen. In his sickness he cried out, not for rescue, but for forgiveness. When he recovered, something had shifted. He began reading the Bible salvaged from the wreck, not casually, desperately. He started to see the island not as punishment, but as judgment, and perhaps mercy. He planted grains found among the ship's stores, watched in disbelief as green shoots rose from the soil. "I can grow food," he whispered. He hunted goats, built traps, crafted crude pottery after many failed attempts. He failed often, burned clay, spilled grain, broke tools, but failure did not defeat him anymore. Time stretched, months, years. The terror of the first days faded into rhythm, until one morning, walking along the shore, he saw it. A footprint, clear, human, not his. He froze. The island was not empty, and suddenly 28 years of solitude felt safer than what might now come. The first weeks did not feel like survival. They felt like shock. Every morning Robinson woke expecting noise, creaking timber, sailors shouting, the familiar rhythm of a ship at sea. Instead, there was only wind moving through trees and waves breaking steadily against the shore. Silence. A silence so complete it pressed against his thoughts. The wreck still stood offshore like a ghost of his former life. As long as it remained visible, hope remained. He swam to it repeatedly, timing his trips with the tide. Each journey was a gamble, one misjudged wave, and he would vanish like the rest of the crew. He stripped the ship bare, food casks, tools, nails, muskets, powder, spare sails, ropes, even bits of iron that might someday prove useful. "I must think ahead," he muttered as he loaded another raft. "The sea gives nothing twice." Back on shore, he began constructing what he called his castle. It was no elegant dwelling, only a tent reinforced against the face of a rocky hill, with a cave dug into the stone behind it. Around the front, he planted thick stakes in a half circle, binding them together with rope, and laboring for days under the sun until the enclosure resembled a crude fortress. He left no visible door, only a ladder he pulled up behind him. If danger came, it would not enter easily. At night, he listened for growls in the dark. None came. That frightened him more. Time began slipping away without structure, and he felt his mind resisting the blur. So he drove a large wooden post into the ground and carved into it the date of his landing, September 30th. Each day afterward he cut another notch. "I will not forget who I am," he told himself. He salvaged ink and paper from the wreck and began keeping a journal, recording the weather, his labor, his fears. At first the entries were frantic and full of dread. "I am cast away on a horrid, desolate island, all the rest of the ship's company drowned." But gradually the tone shifted. He made lists,
assets, resources, possibilities. He forced himself to write not only what he lacked, but what he possessed: tools, food, shelter, life. Still, solitude gnawed at him. He attempted to bake bread from grain he had found among the ship's stores. His first efforts failed miserably, burned half-formed lumps of hardened paste.
He cursed, then tried again. He crafted rough pottery after weeks of experimentation. Most cracked in the fire. Some survived. Small victories felt monumental. He domesticated goats after trapping several in a natural enclosure. Their bleating became the only living sound near his dwelling. Their presence eased the crushing quiet. "I am not entirely alone," he said once, resting a hand against the fence of his pen. Then illness struck. Without warning, fever consumed him. His body burned, his head throbbed violently. He staggered into his shelter and collapsed. For days he drifted between sleep and delirium. He believed he heard voices accusing him. "You would not listen," a voice seemed to say. "You defied counsel. You chased fortune." In his weakness, fear turned inward. "This is judgment," he whispered. Alone, no doctor, no remedy but a little rum and a strange infusion of tobacco he forced himself to drink. In the height of fever, he experienced something that shook him more than the storm ever had. A dream or vision. A figure descended in flame from the sky and stood upon the earth before him. "Seeing all these things have not brought thee to repentance," the figure said. He awoke trembling. For the first time since his arrival, he did not blame the sea. He blamed himself. He began reading the Bible with desperate attention, not out of habit, but out of need. Passages about deliverance and suffering struck him deeply. He fell to his knees in the cave one morning and prayed sincerely, not for rescue, but for understanding. And something changed. Not the island, not his circumstances, but his mind. He began to see his survival as mercy rather than misfortune. "Yes, I am alone," he wrote later in his journal, "but I am alive, and I am preserved." His fever passed. Strength slowly returned. When he stepped outside after days confined to his cave, the sunlight felt new. The island no longer appeared merely hostile. It appeared abundant. He had water, he had food, he had time, and he had something he had not possessed before the wreck: reflection. He resumed building with renewed discipline, expanded the cave, reinforced the outer fence, improved his tools. But now there was a new element to his labor: gratitude. The island was still wild, still uncertain, but it was no longer only a prison. It was a proving ground. And Robinson Crusoe, once a restless young man chasing storms, had begun, at last, to confront the storm within himself. The first grain that sprouted felt like a miracle. He had spilled a few handfuls of barley and rice from a salvaged sack months before, never expecting anything to come of it. Then one morning he saw green blades pushing through the soil near the edge of his dwelling. He stood over them for a long time. "So you will grow," he said quietly, "even here." From that moment, farming became more than necessity, it became structure. He marked out a small field and carefully preserved every seed he could gather. The first harvest was modest, almost disappointing. He resisted the urge to consume it all. "If I eat everything now," he told himself, "I starve next year." So he rationed, saved seed, waited. Waiting was harder than labor. The seasons taught him patience the way storms had taught him fear. He learned the rhythm of rain,
the dryness of certain months, the timing of planting and reaping. His first attempt at baking proper bread took nearly a year to achieve. Grinding grain between stones he shaped himself, mixing water, fashioning crude earthenware vessels for cooking. When at last he held a rough, uneven loaf in his hands, he almost laughed. Who would have thought, he murmured, that bread could feel like triumph? He built additional enclosures for goats, separating the young from the wild stock. Gradually, he created a small herd under his control. Milk followed, then cheese, though crude and often spoiled. Each new skill came with failure. Clay pots shattered in the kiln he improvised from a pit in the earth. Crops failed in poor soil. Tools broke. But he no longer raged at setbacks. He adjusted, improvised, began again. And in the midst of this steady labor, he paused one day and climbed a nearby hill to survey his island fully. He had lived there years, yet had never truly measured its scope. From the height, he saw it clearly, surrounded by endless sea, no visible smoke from distant lands, no passing sails. "I am king of this domain," he said, half smiling, "and prisoner of it." He began to catalogue his condition rationally. Evil, he was alone, separated from mankind, removed from society. Good, he was alive, supplied, healthy. Evil, he might never see England again. Good, he had enough to sustain life for years. He wrote these comparisons in his journal, forcing himself to weigh despair against blessing. Why should I be unhappy when I am preserved from death and given means to live? He explored further inland, discovering fertile valleys and shaded groves. He found turtles near the shore, grapes in abundance in certain seasons. The island was not barren. It was generous if approached wisely. He fashioned a second dwelling in a distant part of the island, a smaller retreat near fertile ground, where he could harvest grapes and dry them into raisins for storage. It was during one of these journeys that he encountered something that unsettled him deeply. Bones, human bones, scattered near a fire pit on the shore. He froze. The reality dawned slowly. Cannibals. This island was not unvisited. He crouched low, examining the remains. "They come here," he whispered, "but they do not stay." For days afterward he scarcely slept. Every sound became suspicious. Every gust of wind through trees sounded like movement. He doubled the strength of his fortifications, moved with greater caution, limited gunfire so as not to draw attention. Fear returned, but it was different now. Less blind panic, more vigilance. Years passed. His beard grew long. His clothes, once salvaged from the wreck, decayed into patched skins and rough garments he fashioned himself. He was no longer the man who had left York. He had become something else, something between civilized and wild. And yet, amid all this transformation, he never stopped marking the days, never stopped writing, never stopped believing that survival meant more than breathing. It meant thinking. One evening, seated outside his dwelling while the sun dipped red beyond the sea, he reflected, "I once believed misfortune meant the loss of comfort, but misfortune is only despair, and I have conquered that." The island had not shrunk, the sea had not opened, but his understanding had deepened. He was no longer merely surviving, he was adapting. And somewhere beyond the horizon, though he could not see it, the next turning point of his fate was already moving toward him. The goats changed everything. At first, they had been nothing more than targets, food on 4 legs, skittish and swift across the hills. But after he trapped several young ones in a natural hollow surrounded by rock, an idea formed. "If I can keep them," he said aloud, "I will never want for meat."
He built fences carefully, stronger than before, learning from earlier mistakes. The first enclosure failed. 2 goats broke through weak stakes and vanished back into the wild. He did not curse this time. He rebuilt, stronger, wider. Soon he had a small herd under his control. He separated the tame from the wild, fed them carefully, learned their habits. Milk followed. Stability followed milk. It was a quiet revolution. "I am no longer at the mercy of the chase," he wrote in his journal. "I am master of my own provision." He fashioned better tools, strengthened his outer defenses. His castle became less of a desperate barricade and more of a homestead. Years passed like this, routine layered upon routine. Then, one morning, everything shattered. He had gone down to the shore, as he often did, to watch the tide and collect what the sea sometimes gifted him. The sand was damp and smooth from the retreating water. And there it was, a single footprint, clear, fresh, human. He stopped breathing. Slowly, almost mechanically, he placed his own foot beside it. Larger. Not his. The world tilted. He looked around wildly. Trees, rocks, shoreline, all unchanged, but nothing was the same. "They are here," he whispered. He did not know how long he stood there before instinct forced him to move. He ran. Not the panicked sprint of a frightened boy, but the swift retreat of a man calculating danger. Back to the fortress. He pulled up the ladder, loaded muskets, checked powder. Every shadow beyond the fence became a potential enemy. For days he scarcely ventured out. When he did, he circled widely, examining the ground for more signs. He found none, which was worse. If there had been many prints, he could measure the threat. One print meant uncertainty. Perhaps they came only occasionally. Perhaps they had not seen his dwelling. Perhaps they watched from the trees at that very moment. Sleep became impossible. Every crack of a branch at night tightened his grip on a loaded musket. Weeks passed before he dared to revisit the shoreline where he had seen the mark. The tide had erased it, but not from his mind. He began preparing for war. Reinforced walls, dug hidden pits, moved some of his supplies into the cave behind his dwelling so that, if forced to abandon the outer fence, he could retreat deeper. It was during this period of vigilance that he expanded his cave further into the rock. At first it was storage, then refuge. He tunneled deeper, hollowing out chambers by hand, working slowly with crude tools. He envisioned a place where he could survive a siege unseen. One afternoon, while digging, part of the cave wall collapsed inward. He leapt back as stones crashed down. Dust filled the air. When it settled, he realized the collapse had revealed a hollow beyond, a natural cavern. He entered cautiously, torch in hand. Inside, the air was cool and still, and in one corner, barely visible in the flicker of flame, lay something that made him recoil. 2 glowing eyes. He raised his musket instantly. The creature moved slightly. A goat, dead, its body preserved in the dry cave air. He exhaled sharply, half laughing at his own fear. "I am haunted by my imagination," he muttered. But the cavern was useful. It became his inner sanctuary, a place for storing powder, tools, and precious goods, a last refuge should the outer defenses fail. Still, the footprint lingered in his thoughts like an unfinished sentence. He had grown comfortable, too comfortable. The island was not his alone. And though months would pass without further sign, he knew now that solitude had been an illusion. The world had found him. It simply had not knocked yet. Years passed between the footprint and the next great turning. Years of vigilance. Years of listening to the wind as if it might carry voices.
He had grown used to living armed. Then one night, during a violent storm, lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the island like cannon fire. Through sheets of rain he saw it, a distant flash near the horizon. Not lightning, gunfire, a ship in distress. He climbed the hill at dawn and saw wreckage scattered along the far reef. A Spanish vessel had struck the rocks during the storm. His heart pounded. Men, he whispered, there must be men. He prepared food, water, weapons, anything that might help survivors. For 2 days he scanned the shoreline. No one came. When the sea calmed enough, he swam toward the broken hull. The ship lay splintered but partially intact. He climbed aboard, searching desperately. No bodies, no survivors. But he found tools, provisions, powder, clothing, and something else. Hope. If they survived, he reasoned, they may yet return. The idea took hold in his mind. Perhaps this was the beginning of rescue. Perhaps the island was not the end of his story. That night he dreamed vividly. He saw savages landing as before, but this time one captive escaped, running toward him. In the dream, he saved the man. The captive became his companion. They built a boat together. They escaped. He awoke with his heart racing. It was not mere fantasy. It was a plan. If one of their prisoners escapes, he said aloud, I must be ready. He prepared carefully, strengthened hidden paths between his dwelling and lookout points, loaded multiple muskets in advance so he could fire rapidly without delay. Then the day came. From his hilltop, he saw canoes approaching. Smoke rose from the shore where they gathered. Through sheets of rain, he counted them, many. They dragged captives onto the beach. One of the prisoners broke free. He ran, not toward the forest, but the very side of the island where Robinson lay hidden. 2 pursuers followed. This was the moment from his dream. His heart pounded, but his mind was steady. He stepped out, raised his musket, and fired. The first savage fell instantly. The second hesitated, stunned by the sound. Robinson reloaded swiftly and fired again. Silence. The fleeing captive stood frozen, staring at him in terror. Robinson lowered the gun slowly. You are safe, he said, though the man understood nothing. The captive dropped to his knees and pressed his head to the ground in submission. Robinson felt something shift inside him. For years he had spoken only to himself. Now another human being stood before him. He brought the young man to his fortress, fed him, and showed him kindness. He named him Friday for the day of his rescue. Friday learned quickly. He watched Robinson's every movement, mimicked his speech, absorbed language at astonishing speed. Robinson taught him English words for simple objects: bread, water, gun. Friday repeated them with careful effort. But Robinson did not stop there. He began teaching him more about God, about good and evil, about why men should not eat one another. Friday listened intently. Why you kill my people? Friday once asked, genuinely puzzled. They eat enemies. That is law. Robinson paused. It was the first true moral challenge he had faced. They are wrong, he answered slowly. Men are not meant to eat men. Friday considered this deeply. He did not argue. He simply nodded. Trust formed quickly between them. Friday became not a servant, but a companion, loyal, brave, eager. For the first time in decades, Robinson heard laughter that was not his own. The island no longer echoed only with wind. It held conversation. He armed Friday, teaching him to shoot, to defend, to guard the dwelling. Together they prepared in case the savages returned. Robinson often studied Friday's face and wondered how thin the line was between civilization and custom.
Had he himself not once acted recklessly, blindly, driven by desire? The island had taught him patience. Now it was teaching him leadership. And for the first time since the wreck, he felt not merely alive, but necessary. The dream had become reality, and the next chapter of his fate had begun. Friday's presence changed the island, but it did not remove danger. If anything, it made the danger sharper. Now there was something to lose. One morning, scanning the sea as had become his habit, Robinson spotted canoes again, more than before. "They come," Friday said quietly, his face tense. This time they did not come for ceremony alone. Through his spyglass, Robinson saw 3 prisoners dragged ashore. One of them unmistakably European, the other older, native in appearance. Friday stiffened. "My father," he whispered. Robinson's pulse quickened. They moved quickly, silently, using paths long prepared for such a moment. Gunpowder was dry, muskets loaded. They waited until the cannibals were distracted. Then Robinson fired. The sound of the musket tore through the beach like thunder. One savage fell. Friday followed with a second shot. Chaos erupted. Some fled to the boats. Others rushed blindly toward the smoke. Robinson did not hesitate. Years of fear had hardened into discipline. They freed the captives swiftly. The older native embraced Friday, tears streaming down his face. The European, weak but alive, stared at Robinson in disbelief. You are English?" he managed to say. "Yes," Robinson answered, "and you are not to die here today." The remaining attackers retreated in panic, leaving their dead behind. That night, the 4 men sat inside the fortress. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, Robinson was surrounded by human voices. The rescued European turned out to be Spanish, and he told a story that ignited hope. There were other survivors on the mainland, men who might help, men who might build a vessel large enough to leave. Plans began forming. For the first time, escape was no longer fantasy. But fate was not finished testing him. One morning, Friday rushed in from the hilltop lookout. "Ship!" he cried. Robinson climbed quickly. A large vessel lay offshore. English. His heart pounded. Rescue. At last. But as he watched through the glass, something felt wrong. A boat was lowered. Several men came ashore. They were not cautious like sailors seeking water. They were forceful, angry, and they dragged 3 bound prisoners with them. Mutiny. Robinson's expression hardened. The prisoners were left under guard while the mutineers explored inland. Robinson approached cautiously and spoke to one of the captives. The man looked at him in astonishment. "I am the captain of that ship," he whispered. "My crew has turned against me." Robinson felt a strange twist of destiny. Years ago, he had been the reckless sailor. Now he stood as judge of another's fate. "How many are loyal?" Robinson asked. "Enough," the captain replied, "if I could regain command." Robinson nodded slowly. "You shall have your ship back." The plan was daring but precise. Divide the mutineers, capture small groups separately, use surprise and fear. Robinson's fortress became a trap. One by one, the mutineers were lured into the forest under false pretenses and disarmed. Friday moved swiftly and silently beside him. The captain regained his strength and authority with each man subdued. A few resisted. Gunfire echoed once more across the island, but the mutiny fractured under pressure.
When the final group realized their position was lost, they surrendered. The captain stood upright once more, no longer bound. "My life is yours," he said to Robinson. Robinson looked toward the sea. "For 28 years," he said quietly, "I have waited for that ship." The next day, under cover of darkness, the captain and his loyal men retook the vessel. The mutineers aboard were overpowered. By morning, the English flag flew in full authority once more. From the shore, Robinson watched the restored ship ride the tide. It was over. The island that had been prison, school, battlefield, and kingdom would soon be behind him. Friday stood beside him. "You go?" Friday asked softly. "Yes." "You leave island?" Robinson hesitated. Part of him would always remain there, among the fields he planted, the walls he built, the marks carved into wood to measure time. But he nodded. "Yes, we go." When he stepped aboard the ship, he did not feel like the reckless youth who had first chased the sea. He felt older, tempered. He looked once more at the shoreline, at the hill where he had first realized he was alone. 28 years, 2 months, 19 days. He had arrived as a restless dreamer. He departed as a man forged by solitude. And as the ship turned toward open water, Robinson Crusoe understood something at last. The island had never been merely exile. It had been transformation. And now, at last, he was ready to return.
The sea did not feel the same. When Robinson Crusoe first sailed from England, he had chased it like a restless dreamer. Now, standing at the rail of the recovered ship, he watched the water with a calm he had never known before. He was not running toward adventure. He was sailing home. The captain treated him with the respect owed to a savior. The crew obeyed him instinctively. Friday stood beside him on deck, staring wide-eyed at the open ocean. "Big water," Friday said softly. "Yes," Robinson replied, "but not bigger than what we survived." When they reached England, the air itself felt unfamiliar. The streets were crowded, voices overlapped, buildings pressed close together. After 28 years of solitude, the noise struck him harder than any storm. He walked through York almost like a stranger. His family, gone. His parents, dead. Time had erased the life he once knew. He stood before what had once been his home and felt something unexpected. Not grief, distance. "I left as a son," he murmured. "I return as something else." But fate had preserved more than his life. His Brazilian plantation, long abandoned in his mind, had flourished. Honest partners had managed it. Profits had accumulated. He was no longer the reckless youth chasing fortune. Fortune had quietly waited for him. When he was told the amount he owned, he did not smile wildly as he once might have. Instead, he said quietly, "So much risk for something that was already prepared." He arranged his affairs carefully, sent aid to those who had helped him, ensured the captain was rewarded, made provisions for Friday, who now remained faithfully at his side. England could not hold him long. Though older and wiser, he still felt the pull of movement. He journeyed again across Europe, not in pursuit of riches, but to settle matters connected to his estate. Friday accompanied him everywhere, learning quickly, adapting to snow and cities with the same resilience he had once shown on the island. It was during one of these travels, crossing a mountainous region in winter, that the final test of their partnership came. The air was bitter. Snow blanketed the ground in heavy silence. Their small company moved cautiously through a narrow pass. Suddenly, the horses reared. From behind a ridge emerged a massive shape, a bear, large, slow, terrifying in its weight. The creature lumbered toward one of the pack animals. Men shouted, some raised muskets. Friday stepped forward. "No shoot," he said quickly. Before Robinson could stop him, Friday approached the bear with astonishing boldness, calling out loudly, waving his arms. The bear paused, confused by the noise. Friday turned and ran deliberately toward a tree. The bear followed.
With agility that startled everyone present, Friday leapt for a low branch and climbed swiftly upward. The bear attempted to follow clumsily, rising on its hind legs and grasping at the trunk. Friday, perched above, called down mockingly in broken English, "Come up! Come up!" The absurdity of it stunned the onlookers. Then Robinson acted. He raised his musket carefully and fired. The shot echoed across the snow-bound valley. The bear staggered, then collapsed heavily at the base of the tree. Silence returned. Friday climbed down, grinning. "You see?" he said proudly. Robinson exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You nearly became the hunted," he replied. Friday only laughed. It was in that moment, surrounded by men, snow, and the echo of gunfire, that Robinson realized something profound. He was no longer alone, not in the world, not in his mind. Years earlier, a footprint in the sand had filled him with terror. Now, standing beside a loyal friend who had faced danger without fear, he felt something entirely different: completion. His life had begun with rebellion, a young man defying his father for the promise of the sea. It had continued through slavery, survival, isolation, and transformation, and it ended not in tragedy, but in balance. He had lost comfort.
He had gained understanding. He had chased fortune. He had found character. As the journey drew toward its natural close, Robinson Crusoe understood that the island had not been a curse, it had been his making. And when he finally rested from his travels, he did so not as the reckless sailor who once fled home, but as a man who had faced solitude, fear, and himself, and endured.